I can't do this. Beatrice Nwosu stood frozen in the corridor. Her fingers shook around the sealed envelope that did not belong to her. The mahogany door ahead remained closed, but the voices behind it were rising, sharp, accusatory, dangerous. You already did. Jae-won's voice came from behind her, low and urgent. She didn't turn around. She couldn't. If she turned around, she would have to look at him. And if she looked at him, she would have to acknowledge what they had done together, what they had become to each other, what she was about to lose. They know, she whispered. Your father. He knows it was me. Not yet. Not everything. But he will. In about 3 minutes, when his legal team finishes tracing the leak. Her hands were steady now. Her eyes were not. Then why are you still standing here? She finally turned, and there he was. Jae-won Shin, the youngest son of one of Korea's most powerful industrial families, looking at her like she was the only solid thing in a world that was crumbling around them both. Why aren't you in there protecting yourself, telling them it was all me? He took one step closer. Just one. But it changed everything. Because... He paused, and something in his expression cracked open. Because 11 years ago, you made a choice to become invisible, and 3 days ago, I watched you choose to be seen. I'm not going to let you stand in that fire alone. The door behind them burst open, and everything they had built in 72 hours of stolen conversations and dangerous alliance, everything they had carefully not said to each other, all of it was about to be dragged into the light. 36 hours earlier, Beatrice had been someone else entirely. If you're new here, welcome to this Afro-Korean Stories. Subscribe. Let's see how it all began. Seoul. 4:17 in the morning. Rain streaking the windows of a hotel room that cost more per night than Beatrice's first apartment in Geneva had cost per month. She moved through the space with the efficiency of someone who had learned to leave no trace. Clothes laid out the night before. Conservative, professional, invisible. The navy blazer that made her look like part of the furniture in any diplomatic setting. The silk blouse in a shade of cream that was photographed as neutral on any delegation's promotional materials. And her UN badge sat on the dresser, next to a French novel she hadn't opened in 3 weeks. Beside it, face down, a photograph she'd carried for 6 years and looked at perhaps twice. She didn't look at it now. Her phone buzzed. A message from Director Harrison in Geneva. Assignment confirmed. Korean industrial negotiation with West African government delegation. Highest sensitivity classification. Maximum discretion required. You were specifically requested. She typed back one word. Confirmed. Then she stood in front of the mirror and looked at herself for exactly 3 seconds. Beatrice Nwosu, 38 years old, born in Lagos, educated in Paris, employed by the United Nations for 11 years, fluent in 7 languages, trusted by diplomats, politicians, and corporate executives on 4 continents, invisible by design, alone by choice, or so she told herself. She left the hotel room without looking back. The Shin Corporation Tower rose 63 stories above Gangnam, all glass and steel and controlled air. Beatrice had worked in buildings like this 100 times. Temples to money and power where the real negotiations happened in the spaces between words. She arrived 40 minutes early. She always arrived 40 minutes early. It gave her time to read the room before anyone else was in it. The 37th floor had been converted into a private negotiation suite. conference table that could seat 20, screens built into the walls, windows that looked out over Seoul like the city was something to be owned rather than lived in. While she chose her position carefully, the corner nearest the window, where she could see both delegations without being seen herself. She set up her materials, legal pads, recording equipment, reference documents. Everything is precise. Everything is controlled. At 8:15, the first delegation arrived. The Shin family entered like royalty, surveying their domain. Shin Byung-ho led the procession, 68 years old, silver-haired, with the kind of posture that suggested he had never bent for anything in his life. Behind him came his eldest son, Shin Tae-soo, 45 and polished to a mirror shine. Legal team, financial advisors, assistants carrying tablets and briefcases, and then, slightly behind, slightly apart, another figure. Beatrice noticed him immediately. Not because he was handsome, though objectively he was. Not because he was the youngest person in the Shin delegation, though that too was obvious. She noticed him because he was doing what she was doing. He was reading the room. His eyes moved across the space with the same careful assessment she had performed 30 minutes earlier. He clocked the positions of the chairs, the sight lines from the windows, the placement of the recording equipment. He straightened his tie, caught his own reflection in the glass wall, and looked away with an expression that suggested he didn't particularly like what he saw. Jae-won Shin, 34 years old, youngest son, Oxford educated according to her briefing materials. He recently returned from London after 5 years abroad. She made a mental note and returned her attention to her preparations. At 8:30, the West African delegation arrived. Minister Adisa Cole led his team with the easy confidence of a man who had been in power long enough to forget what it felt like to be questioned. 55 years old, impeccably dressed with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Behind him came his own parade of lawyers, advisors, and junior officials, young men and women in suits that didn't quite fit as well as the Koreans, carrying the weight of representing a nation in a room designed to make them feel small. Beatrice had seen this dynamic 100 times. The power imbalance built into the architecture itself. The subtle ways that money announced itself on every surface and every silence. She took her position and waited for the negotiation to begin. Good morning, Minister Cole. Now, on behalf of Shin Corporation, we welcome you and your delegation to Seoul. Shin Byung-ho's voice carried the particular warmth of a man who had never needed to be warm to anyone. Beatrice translated smoothly into the diplomatic French that the minister preferred, her voice neutral, her presence unremarkable. The pleasure is ours, Minister Cole replied in French. We look forward to a productive partnership between our nations. Beatrice rendered this into Korean, adding the appropriate honorifics that the minister's French had not quite captured. A small adjustment, invisible, the kind of choice she made 100 times in every negotiation. The formal greetings continued for another 20 minutes, expressions of mutual respect, references to shared history, careful positioning of each side's expectations. Beatrice translated it all with the precision of a machine and the instinct of a diplomat. And all the while she was aware of Jae-won Shin watching her from across the table. Not watching her the way men sometimes watched her, assessing, appraising, cataloging her features for later reference. He was watching her work, watching the micro-decisions she made with every phrase, watching the gaps between what was said and what she chose to render. She didn't like being watched. She had built her entire career on not being watched. But something at his attention felt different, less invasive, more curious. She pushed the thought aside and focused on the negotiation. By 11 o'clock, the real substance had begun to emerge. The mineral rights in question represent a significant investment on our part, Tae-soo was saying, his Korean precise and businesslike. We require exclusive access to the surveyed regions for a minimum of 40 years, with renewal options extending to 60. Beatrice translated this into French, keeping her voice neutral despite the weight of what she was conveying. 60 years of exclusive mineral rights, an entire generation of resources flowing out of the country. Minister Cole nodded thoughtfully, his expression giving nothing away. And the compensation structure? We propose a tiered royalty arrangement with initial payments of 15% of gross extraction value, increasing to 20% after the first decade, Beatrice translated. She watched the junior members of the West African delegation as she spoke, young lawyers and economic advisors who understood the numbers well enough to know they were being offered significantly less than the international standard. None of them spoke. None of them challenged their minister. We find these terms acceptable in principle, Minister Cole replied, subject to review of the environmental compliance documentation. Something flickered across Jae-won's face, just for a moment, a tightening around his eyes that most people would have missed. Beatrice did not miss it. She filed the observation away and continued translating. The first recess came at 12:30. The delegations separated into their respective corners, the Koreans to a private conference room on the east side of the floor, the West Africans to an equivalent space on the west. Beatrice remained at her workstation, reviewing her notes with the careful attention of someone who understood that the real information in any negotiation was in the details people thought no one else would notice. She was alone for perhaps 3 minutes before he appeared. Jae-won Shin crossed the empty negotiation room with the confident stride of someone who belonged wherever he chose to be. He stopped beside her, not too close, but close enough to make his intention clear. "Your French is Parisian," he said in English, "but your hesitation on the mineral rights clause was deliberate. You slowed it down." "But why?" Beatrice looked up at him, her expression carefully blank. "I don't discuss my work with parties to a negotiation." "I'm not asking about your work." His Korean was excellent, she noticed. Native fluency, but with the slight musical variation that suggested time spent abroad. "I'm asking about that specific moment. You gave them an extra 2 seconds to process the 40-year exclusivity term. That wasn't an accident." "Mr. Shin." "Jae-won." "Mr. Shin." She set down her pen with deliberate precision. "I am here to facilitate communication between two parties engaged in sensitive diplomatic and commercial negotiations. I am not here to explain my methodology to the son of one of those parties." "The third son," he corrected, with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. The one nobody pays attention to, which means I have time to pay attention to things that matter." "Step back, Mr. Shin." He did, immediately, without argument or offense. But he didn't leave. "The land in that clause," he said quietly, There are 4,000 families on it, villages that have existed for 6 generations, schools, churches, a medical clinic that serves 50,000 people in the surrounding region. He paused. I thought you should know that, in case it affects your hesitation next time. Then he walked away. Beatrice sat very still for a long moment, her heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. She already knew about the families. She had read the background brief, all 300 pages of it. She knew about the villages and the schools and the clinic. Yet she knew about the protected environmental status that had been mysteriously downgraded 6 months before the negotiation was announced. That's why she had slowed the clause down. She didn't think anyone had noticed. The afternoon session was longer and more detailed. Beatrice translated for 4 hours straight, moving between Korean and French and the occasional English when the minister's advisors required clarification on technical terms. She was excellent at this. She had been excellent at this for 11 years. The rhythm of other people's words flowing through her, taking shape in new sounds and new syntax, carrying meaning across the invisible barriers of language. It was the loneliest job in the world, and she had chosen it precisely because it was lonely. You couldn't get too close to anyone when your job was to be the bridge between them. You couldn't form attachments when you were designed to be replaceable. Every relationship she had ever attempted had eventually broken against the reality of her work, the unpredictable travel, the classified nature of her assignments, the way she could never quite fully arrive anywhere because she was always about to leave. The French diplomat had been the last attempt. 3 years of trying to build something that could survive her absence. In the end, he had told her that loving her was like loving a ghost, someone who was always partly somewhere else, always carrying words that didn't belong to her. She had not argued with him. She had simply packed her things and moved to a different hotel. That was 4 years ago. But now she stood in this glass tower in Seoul, translating from someone else's country, and she thought about what Jae-won Shin had said. 4,000 families. The session ended at 6:30. The delegations departed with the usual pleasantries, handshakes and promises to resume negotiations in the morning, expressions of optimism that no one in the room actually felt. Beatrice gathered her materials slowly. She was usually the last to leave. It was a habit. It was also a necessity. She needed time to decompress, to shake off the words that didn't belong to her, to remember who she was underneath the neutral voice. She reached for her notepad and stopped. There was a folded document tucked beneath it, not hers. She should hand it to security. She knew this immediately and with complete certainty. Unknown documents in high-security negotiations were handled through proper channels. There were protocols. There were procedures. There were very good reasons why interpreters did not pick up papers that did not belong to them. She picked it up anyway. Inside the fold was a land survey, detailed, technical, annotated in both Korean and English. She scanned the contents with the speed of someone who had read thousands of classified documents over her career. The environmental clearance for the mining operation had been falsified. The protected status of the land where 4,000 families lived, had been deliberately misrepresented to the West African government. The geological surveys had been altered to understate the environmental impact. And buried in the annotations, 2 wire transfers from a Shin Corporation subsidiary to an offshore account linked to Minister Adisa Cole. 2 wire transfers totaling $4 million. At the bottom of the document, in clean handwriting, "I can't get this out alone. You move between both sides. You're the only one who can." J.S. Beatrice folded the document, put it in her bag, walked to the elevator. In the elevator, alone, her composure finally shifted. Her hands came up to press against her face. Her breath came faster than she wanted it to. She closed her eyes. She had come to Seoul for a clean assignment. That night, Beatrice did not sleep. She sat in her hotel room with the document spread across the desk, reading it again and again, checking the annotations, cross-referencing the dates with the public timeline of the negotiation, looking for any sign that this was fabricated, planted, designed to manipulate her into doing something foolish. She found none. The evidence was real, the corruption was documented, and the man who had given it to her, Jae-won Shin, the invisible third son, was asking her to do something that would end her career. She thought about what Director Harrison would say. She thought about the protocols she had followed for 11 years without deviation. She thought about the careful neutrality that had protected her from exactly this kind of impossible choice. And then she thought about 4,000 families. 7:15 in the morning. The negotiation floor was empty except for one person. Jae-won Shin sat alone at the conference table, a cup of coffee growing cold beside him. He was staring at the windows, at the Seoul skyline, at the city where his family had built an empire on decisions exactly like the one being made in this room. Beatrice sat down across from him. She placed the document between them. "Your plan is reckless," she said. "If this surfaces wrong, it destroys the evidence and gives the minister cover to walk away clean." He looked at her. Really looked at her for the first time since that moment in the corridor when he had seen through her professional mask. "I'm open to better plans. I'm not here to make a plan. I'm here to tell you I read it." And she held his gaze. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled tight. "The wire transfers," she said finally. "Do you have the originals or copies?" He almost smiled. This time it reached his eyes. "I have both." "And the environmental surveys? The original assessments before they were altered?" "Locked in a safe deposit box in my brother's name. He doesn't know what's in it." "Why?" "Because he would have destroyed them. Tai-Soo believes that family loyalty means protecting the family name at any cost. He doesn't ask questions about what that name is attached to." Beatrice leaned back in her chair, studying him. The morning light caught the exhaustion in his face, the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his jaw. This was not a man who had slept well in recent months. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You're asking me to trust you with my career, my reputation, possibly my freedom, depending on how the UN handles my involvement. I need to understand why you're willing to burn down your own family." Jae-won was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, lower, rawer, stripped of the careful polish he had worn in the negotiation room. "I spent 5 years in London telling myself I could escape, that I could build something separate from the Shin name, something that had nothing to do with the way my family makes its money." He turned his coffee cup in his hands, not drinking from it. "I worked on an urban development project in Lagos for 2 years. Community housing, local contractors. The kind of work that actually helps people." "What happened?" "It went wrong. The local government pulled permits at the last minute. 300 families lost their deposits. Their savings, everything they had put toward owning homes for the first time. He paused. It took me 6 months to find out that my father's company had bribed the officials to block the project. They wanted the land for a luxury hotel. Beatrice absorbed this. The shape of his story, the weight of it. So you came back to fight from the inside. I came back to try to fix things, to be in the room where decisions were made, to... He stopped, shook his head. To matter more here than I did running away. But I've been back for 18 months now, and all I've done is watch the same thing happen over and over again. Different countries, different families being destroyed. Same people are profiting. And this negotiation is where you decided to stop watching? This negotiation is where I finally have enough evidence to do something. And you... He looked at her with an intensity that made her want to look away. You're the only person in that room who isn't owned by either side. You move between them. You hear everything. And I watched you yesterday. I watched you give the minister's team 2 extra seconds to understand what they were signing. You care. You're not supposed to care, but you do. She didn't deny it. If I do this, she said slowly, I lose everything I've built. 11 years of credibility, access to negotiations that actually matter, the ability to be in rooms where I can make a difference, even if that difference is just slowing down a clause by 2 seconds. I know. And you're asking me to give that up for a fight I might not win. I'm asking you to help me try. She looked down at the document between them. The evidence of corruption. The 4,000 families who would lose their homes, their land, their futures, if this deal went through as planned. 24 hours, she said. We have maybe 24 hours before this deal closes and the minister takes his money and disappears into diplomatic immunity. Tell me exactly what you have and exactly how we can use it. Jae-won's expression shifted. Relief and determination, and something else. Something that looked almost like hope. I can have everything you need within the hour. The second day of negotiations began at 9 o'clock with a tension that hadn't been there before. Beatrice took her position in the corner, her face neutral, her heart racing beneath her professional calm. Jae-won sat in his usual place at the far end of the Shin delegation side of the table, but now, when their eyes met across the room, something passed between them. An awareness, an alliance, a shared knowledge that transformed the negotiation into a kind of performance. Minister Cole was pushing to accelerate the timeline. Given the excellent progress we made yesterday, he said in French, his smile warm and utterly false, I believe we can finalize the remaining details within the next 12 hours rather than the originally scheduled 24. My government is eager to begin the partnership. Beatrice translated this into Korean, keeping her voice perfectly neutral. But under the table, she wrote one word on her notepad and angled it so that Jae-won could see it from across the room. Why? He read it without changing his expression. He made a note on his own pad, slid it to his brother as if it were a routine business communication. Tai-Soo glanced at it without interest and set it at the edge of the table. From Beatrice's position, she could read the words clearly. Someone warned him. He wants out before it unravels. The clock had just gotten shorter. The morning session was a careful dance of legal language and diplomatic positioning. Beatrice translated clause after clause, and watching the minister's team accept terms that would have been rejected by any competent negotiator who wasn't already bought and paid for. She watched the junior lawyer on the West African delegation, a young man named Kofi, who had studied at the London School of Economics and should have known better than to stay silent. His pen had stopped moving 20 minutes ago. He was staring at the contract in front of him like it was a document in a language he didn't recognize. He knew something was wrong, he just didn't have the power to say it. Beatrice thought about all the rooms she had stood in over 11 years. All the times she had watched good people stay silent because speaking up would cost them everything. All the times she had been one of those silent people, and telling herself that neutrality was a virtue rather than a cage. At 11:30, the session broke for a brief recess. She moved quickly. The stairwell was concrete and fluorescent light, the most unromantic possible setting. But it was private, and privacy was what they needed. Jae-won was already there when she arrived, pacing the landing with the restless energy of a man who had been holding still for too long. "The minister's acceleration," he said without preamble. Someone tipped him off. Either he knows about the evidence, or he suspects something's coming and he wants to close this deal before it hits. "Do you know who warned him?" "It could be anyone. My father has contacts in every intelligence service in Asia. The minister has his own sources." Jae-won ran a hand through his hair, disrupting the careful styling he had arrived with that morning. "We need to move faster. I have a contact in the UN press office, a woman named Sarah Chen. We work together in Geneva. She has relationships with investigative journalists who specialize in corporate corruption." "Can you trust her?" "I've trusted her with my life before. She won't ask questions I can't answer." He nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "The documents are ready. Original surveys, wire transfer records, the falsified environmental assessment. I can have them in your hands within the hour." "How?" "There's a service entrance on the 20th floor. I'll leave them in a maintenance closet. Third door past the elevators. The key code is my mother's birthday." He almost smiled. She's the only person in my family who knows what I'm doing." "She approves." Beatrice absorbed this. "Your mother knows." "She's known for months. She's the one who told me about the Lagos project, about what my father did to stop it. She said—" He paused, his expression softening in a way she hadn't seen before. "She said the Shin family has been choosing money over people for 3 generations, and she's tired of being the only one who remembers that it doesn't have to be this way. She sounds like someone I would like. She would like you too. She has a weakness for people who refuse to be invisible." Beatrice looked away, uncomfortable with how much that statement landed. "We should focus on the logistics," she said. "I'll retrieve the documents during the lunch break." "Sarah's in Singapore right now, but she has a journalist contact in Seoul. Someone who's been investigating Korean corporate corruption for years. If I can get the evidence to her by this evening. The story breaks tomorrow morning, and the deal falls apart before anyone can sign it." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of what they were planning settling around them like a physical presence. "Beatrice," Jae-won said quietly. "Yes?" "I know what I'm asking you to risk. I know what this could cost you, and I know we've only known each other for 36 hours, which means you have no reason to trust anything I say." He met her eyes directly. "But I want you to know that I see what you do in that room, the way you carry other people's words without letting them break you. The way you stay invisible so that everyone else can be seen. It's Extraordinary. You're extraordinary, and whatever happens next, I won't let you face it alone. She didn't know how to respond to that. She wasn't sure anyone had ever said anything like that to her before. We should get back, she said finally. We'll be missed. He nodded, but he didn't move immediately. For a moment, they just stood there. Two people on the edge of something dangerous, something that could destroy everything they had built, something that felt more real than anything either of them had experienced in years. Then she turned and walked up the stairs, and he followed at a careful distance, and they returned to the negotiation room as if nothing had changed. Everything had changed. If you're still with me, and I hope you are, take a moment to breathe. This story is far from over, and what happens next will change everything for Beatrice and Jaewon. If you're feeling what they're feeling, drop a comment and let me know. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and share this with someone who loves stories about impossible choices and unlikely connections. Now, let's keep going. The afternoon session was the most difficult translation of Beatrice's career. Not because the language was complex. It wasn't. Not because the subject matter was technical. She had handled far more intricate negotiations. It was difficult because she knew what she was translating, and she knew what it would do to the people it was designed to exploit, and she had to render it perfectly anyway. And the Shin Corporation's legal team had introduced new contract language, buried in a subclause, dressed as standard boilerplate, designed to strip the West African government of any future environmental recourse. If the mining operation contaminated the water supply or destroyed the agricultural land or displaced the 4,000 families who lived in its path, the government would have no legal standing to seek compensation or remediation. Beatrice translated every word exactly as it was written. She watched the junior lawyer Kofi as she spoke. She watched his pen stop. She watched him look up at Minister Cole with an expression that mixed horror and helplessness in equal measure. She watched him say nothing. She understood that silence. She had lived inside that silence for 11 years, and she knew, in that moment, that she couldn't live inside it anymore. The session ended at 5 o'clock. The delegations departed. Beatrice gathered her materials. She waited until the room was empty, then made her way to the 20th floor. The maintenance closet was exactly where Jaewon had said it would be. Third door past the elevators, key code for his mother's birthday. Inside, wrapped in a plain manila envelope, was everything they needed to destroy the deal. She tucked the envelope into her bag and returned to the negotiation floor. She almost made it. A Shin Corporation aide, a young man with the nervous energy of someone desperate to prove himself, was standing by the elevator when the doors opened. He looked at her, looked at the direction she had come from, said nothing. But she saw him pull out his phone as she walked away. 7 o'clock. The building was mostly empty. The Seoul skyline glowed orange and purple through the windows, the city settling into its evening rhythm. Beatrice sat at her workstation, ostensibly reviewing transcripts. In reality, she was composing a careful message to Sarah Chen in Singapore, explaining what she had and what she needed, and how quickly they needed to move. "You're still here." She looked up. Jaewon stood in the doorway of the conference room, his jacket off, his tie loosened, looking more human than she had seen him look since this began. "I could say the same about you." I'm always the last to leave. My father thinks it's dedication. My brother thinks it's a weakness. My mother thinks I'm avoiding going home to an empty apartment. He crossed the room and sat down across from her, not in his usual position at the negotiation table, but in the chair beside hers. She's right, usually. Tonight I'm here because I wanted to make sure you were okay. I'm fine. That's not what I asked. She set down her pen. I made contact with my source. She's reaching out to the journalist tonight. If everything goes according to plan, the story will be ready to run by tomorrow morning. That's also not what I asked. She was quiet for a moment. One of your father's aides saw me leaving the 20th floor. I don't know if he understood what he saw, but we might have less time than we thought. Yes. Jaewon absorbed this. He didn't panic. He didn't blame her. He simply nodded and adjusted his calculations. Then, we need to accelerate, he said. The evidence needs to be authenticated tonight. The journalist needs to have everything in hand before the negotiation resumes tomorrow. I know. I'm working on it. What can I do? She looked at him. Really looked at him. At the determination in his face, at the way he had positioned himself, not across from her, but beside her. Like they were partners. Like they were in this together. You can tell me about London, she said. He blinked. What? You said you were there for 5 years. You mentioned Lagos, but you never told me. She hesitated, unsure why she was asking this, unsure why it mattered. You never told me what you were looking for. What you thought you would find if you ran far enough from this. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the city lights pulsed and shifted. Freedom, I suppose, he said finally. The ability to be someone who wasn't defined by my family's name. Someone who could choose what mattered to him and pursue it without... He made a gesture that encompassed the building, the skyline, the empire his family had built, without all of this weighing on every decision. Did you find it? For a while, in London, in Lagos, in the work I was doing, I felt like I was becoming the person I wanted to be, someone who built things instead of taking them apart, someone who helped people instead of profiting from their loss. He paused. And then I got the call about my mother, her diagnosis, the prognosis. I'm sorry. She's fine now, full recovery. But by the time she was better, I was already back, already caught in the gravity of it. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. I told myself I was staying to fight from the inside. But I think the truth is that I was just afraid. Afraid that if I left again, I would be running forever. Afraid that if I stayed, I would become my father. And now? Now I'm sitting in an empty conference room with a woman I met 48 hours ago, planning to destroy my family's company and possibly my entire future. He smiled, but it was sad. It's not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. Something smaller, maybe. A quiet resistance. A series of small choices that would eventually add up to something meaningful. He shook his head. Not this. Not you. She felt something shift in her chest. Something she had kept locked away for 4 years, since the French diplomat had told her she was impossible to love. I should tell you something, she said quietly. Anything. The photograph in my hotel room. The one I keep face down. She took a breath. It's my mother. She died 8 years ago. I wasn't there. I was in the middle of a negotiation in Vienna, and by the time I got the call, by the time I could get to Lagos... She stopped. I've told myself for 8 years that I made the right choice, that my work matters, that being invisible in rooms where powerful people make decisions is how I make a difference in the world. But sometimes I wonder if I just chose the job because it was easier than choosing people. Jaewon didn't offer comfort. He didn't tell her she had made the right choice or the wrong one. He simply listened, his presence steady and warm. My mother told me once, he said after a long silence, that the most dangerous people in any room are the ones who have made peace with what's wrong. She meant it as a warning about my father. But I think she was also talking about herself, about all the years she stayed silent while the family did what it did. Beatrice nodded slowly. My mother said something similar. She said the only sin that can't be forgiven is the one you stopped noticing. They looked at each other. The city hummed outside the windows. Neither of them moved. Neither of them moved. And then her phone buzzed, and the moment shattered. Sarah Chen had responded. The journalist was ready. The window was open. They had to move now. The next 4 hours were a blur of encrypted messages, authenticated documents, and careful coordination across 3 time zones. Beatrice used her UN access to retrieve the additional files Jaewon had secured. Verification codes, metadata, everything the journalist would need to confirm the evidence was genuine. She worked with the cold efficiency that had defined her career. But underneath the professional calm, something had shifted. She was no longer neutral. She was no longer invisible. She was choosing a side for the first time in 11 years, and the choice felt both terrifying and inevitable. At 11:30, the journalist confirmed receipt of all materials. The story would run by morning. At 11:45, Beatrice's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She answered. Miss Nwosu. The voice was male, older, accented with the precise Korean of someone who had spent decades in international business. This is Shin Byung-ho. Her blood went cold. Mr. Shin, I don't believe we've been formally introduced. We haven't. But I know who you are. I know what you do. And I know that approximately 4 hours ago, you were observed leaving a floor of this building where you had no legitimate business. She said nothing. I also know that my youngest son has been behaving erratically for the past several months, meeting with people he shouldn't be meeting with, asking questions about matters that don't concern him. I had hoped it was merely the restlessness of youth, but now I suspect it may be something more serious. Mr. Shin, I'm not sure what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, Miss Nwosu. I'm stating facts. The fact is that I have invested considerable resources in this negotiation. The fact is that my company stands to benefit significantly from its successful conclusion. And the fact is that I will not allow anyone, not my son, not a UN interpreter, not anyone, to interfere with that conclusion. Is that a threat? It is a clarification. Tomorrow morning the negotiation will resume. The contract will be signed, and whatever amateur conspiracy you and Jaewon believe you have constructed, it will amount to nothing. He paused. Ma, have a pleasant evening, Miss Nwosu. I look forward to seeing you at the table. The line went dead. Beatrice sat very still, her heart pounding. Then she picked up the phone and called Jaewon. They met in the stairwell again. The same fluorescent lights, the same concrete walls, but everything different now. He knows, she said. Maybe not everything, but enough. He called me directly. Jae-won's face was pale, but his voice was steady. What did he say? That the negotiation will proceed tomorrow, that whatever we've done won't matter. He's bluffing. Are you sure? He was quiet for a moment. No, but the evidence is already with the journalist. Even if my father shuts down the negotiation, even if he finds a way to bury the story, the documents are out of his control now. He can't unring that bell. Unless he has influence with the journalist, or the publication, or the sources who could verify the documents. My father is powerful, but he's not omnipotent. He can't reach everyone. He reached me in the middle of the night, on a number I haven't given to anyone connected to this assignment. She met his eyes. He's sending a message, Jae-won. He wants us to know that he sees everything. Then we have to move faster. The story breaks tomorrow morning. If we can delay the signing until then, how? The minister wants to close early. Your father wants to close early. Everyone in that room tomorrow will be pushing to get this done before anything can go wrong. Jae-won paced the landing, his mind working through possibilities. I could refuse to sign. As the third son, my signature isn't required for the deal to proceed, but my absence would raise questions. It might buy time. Not enough time. And it would expose you completely. Then what? Beatrice thought about the negotiation room, about the dynamics she had observed over 2 days of careful watching, about the people who sat silently while their futures were signed away. There's someone, she said slowly, one of the minister's junior lawyers. His name is Kofi. He studied at the London School of Economics. He knows what the contract says, and he knows what it will do to his country. You think he'll help? I think he wants to. I think he's been waiting for someone to give him permission. She paused. I've been watching him for 2 days. Like every time a problematic clause comes up, his pen stops. Every time his minister accepts something unconscionable, his expression shifts. He's not a coward. He's trapped. He doesn't have the authority to challenge his own delegation. But if he had evidence, he would have justification. He could go to his government directly. He could force the minister's hand. Beatrice met Jae-won's eyes. We need to get him a copy of the documents. Tonight, before the negotiation resumes. How do we find him? I know where the delegation is staying. The UN maintains relationships with all the hotels they use. She pulled out her phone. Give me 30 minutes. Kofi Mensah sat alone in the hotel bar, nursing a drink he wasn't tasting, staring at the television news with eyes that weren't seeing it. Beatrice approached his table and sat down without asking permission. Mr. Mensah, my name is Beatrice Nwosu. I'm the interpreter assigned to your delegation's negotiation with Shin Corporation. He looked at her with the wariness of someone who had learned not to trust unexpected visitors. I know who you are. You're the one who's been watching me. Yes. Why? Because I recognize the expression on your face. It's the same expression I see in my mirror every morning. She leaned forward slightly. You know what this contract will do to your country. You know what your minister has agreed to accept. And you've been sitting in that room for 2 days, waiting for someone to give you an excuse to speak up. Kofi's expression flickered, surprise, fear, and something that might have been hope. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. She reached into her bag and withdrew a sealed envelope. This contains evidence that the environmental clearance for the mining operation was falsified. It contains documentation of wire transfers from a Shin Corporation subsidiary to an offshore account controlled by Minister Cole, and it contains the original land surveys that show the true impact this project will have on the communities in its path. Kofi stared at the envelope like it was a bomb. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because I can't do anything with it. I'm a UN interpreter. If I surface this evidence, it will be dismissed as political interference. It needs to come from your side, from someone with standing to challenge your own minister." "I'm a junior lawyer. I don't have—" "You have contacts in your home government. You have colleagues who would listen to you. And you have—" She tapped the envelope. "Everything you need to prove that this deal was never in your country's interest." Kofi was silent for a long moment. His hands were trembling slightly when he reached for the envelope. "If I do this, if I go to my contacts with this evidence, my career is over. The minister will destroy me." "Yes. And you're asking me to do it anyway?" Beatrice met his eyes directly. "I'm asking you to make the same choice I'm making, to stop being invisible. To stop letting other people's words matter more than your own." She paused. "I can't promise you it will be worth it. I can't promise you anything except that whatever happens, you won't have to live with silence anymore." Kofi looked at the envelope, looked at her, made a decision. "I know a journalist in Accra," he said quietly. "She's been investigating the minister for years. She could never get enough evidence to publish anything." He took the envelope. "Now she can." Beatrice nodded. "The international story breaks tomorrow morning. If your journalist can coordinate with ours, I'll make the call tonight." They sat in silence for a moment, two people who had just changed the course of their lives. "Thank you," Kofi said finally. "Don't thank me yet." "Thank me when it's over." She stood up and walked out of the bar without looking back. The morning came with the weight of everything that was about to happen. Beatrice arrived at the negotiation floor at 7:30, her UN credentials scanning her through security, her face as neutral as it had ever been. But underneath the professional mask, her heart was racing. The journalist's story was scheduled to publish at 9 o'clock. Kofi's contact in Ghana was ready to run her own piece simultaneously. And somewhere in the building, Shin Byung-ho was preparing to close a deal that was about to become the center of an international corruption scandal. She took her position in the corner of the room and waited. At 8 o'clock, the delegations began to arrive. And the Shin family entered first, Byung-ho leading, Tai-soo following, and Jae-won bringing up the rear. The patriarch's eyes swept the room and landed on Beatrice with a weight that made her skin crawl. But she didn't look away. She met his gaze and held it until he turned to take his seat. The West African delegation arrived moments later. Minister Cole was smiling, confident, eager to conclude the negotiation that would make him a very rich man. Behind him, his legal team filed in. Kofi Mensah took his usual seat at the far end of the table. Their eyes met for just a moment. He nodded, almost imperceptibly. It was done. The session opened with the usual formalities. Expressions of appreciation for the productive negotiations, anticipation of the signing ceremony to come. Beatrice translated smoothly, her voice neutral, her presence unremarkable. At 8:45, Minister Cole received a message on his phone. She watched his face as he read it, watched the color drain from his cheeks, watched his smile freeze and crack like ice under pressure. He excused himself from the table. He did not return. At exactly 9 o'clock, the news broke. A notification rolled across every phone in the room simultaneously. Shin Corporation executives, West African government officials, lawyers and advisors on both sides, all of them stared at their screens as the story hit. Shin Corporation linked to falsified environmental clearance in West African mining deal. Minister Adisa Cole, under investigation for accepting millions in bribes. The evidence obtained by International Investigation Team. The negotiation room became a different kind of room entirely. Taesu was on his phone within seconds, shouting in rapid Korean at whoever was on the other end. The Shin Corporation's legal team huddled together, their faces pale. The West African delegation sat frozen, uncertain what to do now that their leader had fled. And Shin Byung-ho stood at the head of the table, very still, watching his empire absorb a blow he hadn't seen coming. His eyes found Jae-won across the room. Jae-won didn't look away. "You," the patriarch said softly. Just that one word, just that one acknowledgement. Jae-won rose from his seat. "Yes, me. You would destroy your own family." "I would save it." Jae-won's voice was steady but raw with emotion. "You can't see the difference anymore." "But I can." The silence in the room was absolute. Then Kofi Mensah stood up. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the space. "I believe I need to make a call to my government." He walked out of the room without looking back. Several other junior members of the West African delegation followed him. Minister Cole was intercepted in the lobby by members of his own team. The junior lawyer who had been too afraid to speak up yesterday was the one who made the call to their home government's justice ministry. He had been carrying his own evidence for weeks. He had just needed the story to break first. And Beatrice stood in her corner, her position, her invisible place. And she was not invisible anymore. Everyone in the room knew what she had done. She stood straight. She did not apologize with her posture. An hour later, the building was nearly empty. The delegations had scattered to emergency meetings, to lawyers' offices, to airports. The beautiful conference room with its sweeping views of Seoul had become a tomb for a deal that would never be signed. Beatrice sat alone at the table, her phone on speaker as Director Harrison delivered the news she had expected. "There will be a formal review," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Your role in this situation cannot be ignored. You understand that, Beatrice?" "I understand. Suspension of current posting, effective immediately. You'll need to return to Geneva for the process." "I understand." 11 years. His voice cracked slightly. 11 years of impeccable service. This will likely end your career. "I know." Silence on the line. Was it worth it?" he asked finally. She thought about 4,000 families, about Kofi Mensah walking out of that room with his head held high, about Jae-won standing up to his father for the first time in his life. "Yes," she said. "It was worth it." She ended the call. She sat in the quiet for a moment. Then Jae-won appeared in the doorway. His jacket was off. His tie was gone. He looked like someone who had finally set down something very heavy. "My father won't speak to me," he said. "Mine didn't speak to me for a year once. We're fine now." He crossed the room and sat beside her, not across from her, beside her. This was the first time they had sat like this, like equals with nowhere else to be. "What do you do now?" he asked. "I don't know. A first time in 11 years, I don't know." Is that terrifying? She considered the question honestly. Ask me again tomorrow." He looked at her. She looked at him. The room was quiet. Soul hummed outside the glass, indifferent to the lives that had just been transformed within these walls. Nothing was resolved. Everything had shifted. "I have a question," Jaewon said quietly. "Ask." "The photograph, the one you keep face down in your hotel room." She was silent for a moment. "What about it? Will you turn it face up tonight?" She didn't answer immediately. The question landed somewhere deep, somewhere she had kept protected for 8 years. "Maybe," she said finally. "Maybe it's time." He nodded. He didn't push further. He just sat with her in the silence, in the aftermath. I've been the space where two people who had chosen to stop being invisible could finally be seen. "Beatrice," he said. "Yes?" "I meant what I said. In the corridor, before everything fell apart. I see you, not the interpreter, not the role you play in rooms where powerful people make decisions. You." She turned to face him fully. The morning light caught the exhaustion in both their faces. The cost of 3 days without proper sleep, the weight of what they had done, and what was still to come. "For what it's worth," she said, "I see you too." He smiled. A real smile this time, one that reached his eyes. They didn't kiss, they didn't make promises. They just sat together in the quiet room as the city moved on outside. Two people who had found each other in the middle of chaos and chosen to stay. They didn't kiss. They didn't make promises. They just sat together in the quiet room as the city moved on outside. Two people who had found each other in the middle of chaos and chose to stay. If you've made it this far, thank you. Thank you for staying with Beatrice and Jaewon through this story of impossible choices and unexpected connections. If this moved you, if it made you feel something real, I hope you'll subscribe, leave a comment, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. This is Afro-Korean Stories TV, where we believe that the most powerful stories are the ones that cross borders and change us in the process. Until next time, take care of each other. 3 days later, Beatrice stood in her hotel room with her bags packed. So the UN review process would begin when she arrived in Geneva. The outcome was uncertain, but she had made peace with the possibilities. 11 years of perfect service couldn't be erased by one decision, even a decision as significant as this one. And perhaps she didn't want it erased. Perhaps the decision was the most important thing she had ever done, with all those years of training and access and invisible influence. Her phone buzzed. A message from Jaewon. "My mother wants to meet you before you leave. She says any woman who can get her son to finally stand up for something is worth knowing." "Dinner tonight?" She smiled. "Tell her I'll be there." She looked at the nightstand. The French novel she still hadn't opened. The UN badge that might not mean the same thing tomorrow that it had meant yesterday. And the photograph. She picked it up, turned it face up. Her mother smiled back at her, younger in the picture than Beatrice was now, but with the same eyes, the same stubbornness set to her jaw, the same quality of presence that demanded attention even in a frozen image. "I made a choice, Mama," she said quietly. "I don't know if it was the right one, but it was mine." She set the photograph down, face up, where she could see it. Then she picked up her bag and walked out of the room. They train you to be invisible, to carry other people's words without leaving fingerprints, to be the voice in the room that belongs to no one. What they don't train you for is the moment you decide your own words matter more. What they don't train you for is the moment you choose to be seen. What they don't train you for is finding someone who sees you back. My name is Beatrice Nwosu. For 11 years, I was an interpreter, a conduit, a bridge between worlds. Now, I don't know what I am, but for the first time in a very long time, I'm ready to find out. Beatrice walked through the Seoul airport with her head held high. Her credentials would be reviewed. Her career might be over. Her entire identity as a professional was uncertain in ways it had never been before, and yet she felt lighter than she had in years. Her phone buzzed again, this time by a news alert. Ghana government opens formal investigation into Minister Cole. International corruption. Probe expands to include additional African nations. Below it, a second alert. Shin Corporation announces internal review of all West African operations. Third son Jaewon Shin named to lead ethics committee. She stopped walking, read the second headline again. A text from Jaewon appeared beneath it. Told you I could matter here. It just took a while to figure out how. She smiled. Congratulations, Mr. Ethics Committee. Thank you, Miss Former Interpreter. Dinner tonight still stands. My mother is cooking herself for the occasion. Should I be worried? Very. She's been asking me about your favorite foods, and I had to admit I don't know. Nigerian jollof rice. I'll pass that along. She'll probably spend the rest of the day watching YouTube tutorials. Beatrice laughed. Actually laughed. Out loud, in the middle of the airport. A few people turned to look at her. She didn't care. See you tonight, Jaewon. See you tonight, Beatrice. She put her phone away and kept walking. Whatever came next, the review, the possible end of her career, the uncertain future stretching out before her, she would face it. She would face it. She would face it knowing that somewhere in Seoul there was someone who understood the weight of what she had carried and had chosen to help her set it down. The airport hummed around her with the energy of thousands of lives in transit, thousands of stories unfolding, thousands of choices being made. She was just one of them, but she was no longer invisible. And that made all the difference. This story is written by Afro-Korean Stories TV, an original production. All characters are fictional.